The order exists before anyone speaks about it. It is already written, already formatted, already aligned with the margins that define authority. Its language is precise and unadorned, stripped of explanation. Each sentence is complete. Each instruction ends with a period, not a question. It does not ask for interpretation. It does not invite reflection. It moves because it is meant to move. Paper changes hands. Signals change status. A message is received, acknowledged, forwarded. The process is quiet and uninterrupted. No urgency is required. Urgency would imply uncertainty. This is not a suggestion moving through a discussion. It is a directive traveling through channels built to carry weight without friction. The order passes through rooms designed for compliance. Desks are cleared to make space for it. Lamps illuminate it long enough for verification, not consideration. The same gestures repeat. Read, confirm, transmit. No one alters a word. No one pauses long enough for doubt to become audible. The order does not need reinforcement. Its authority is assumed, embedded in the structure that delivers it. Time behaves differently around it. Clocks continue their steady work, but the moment feels fixed, as though the decision has already settled into the past while its effects remain pending. The order moves forward without acceleration, without delay. It advances at the speed the system was designed to allow. Steady, reliable, irreversible. There is comfort in its clarity. Ambiguity has been removed. The steps are numbered. The sequence is closed. Every action has a place, and every place has an action assigned to it. This is how errors survive, not through chaos, but through order. Acknowledgements return upward, identical in phrasing, uniform in tone. Confirmation replaces conversation. The order becomes real not through execution, but through acceptance. Once accepted, it no longer belongs to the individual who reads it. It belongs to the structure. No one considers stopping it, because stopping is not one of the listed actions. There is no field for objection. There is no margin wide enough for warning. The system was not built to ask whether the order should exist, only whether it has been received. Outside the channels it travels through, life continues at its usual pace. Routines remain intact. Equipment is checked. Schedules hold. The order does not disrupt normality. It blends into it. That is its strength. By the time the final acknowledgement is sent, the order no longer feels like a decision. It feels like a fact, something already accomplished, something already beyond reach. What follows will appear sudden to those outside the system. Inside it, everything has already happened. The environment that receives the order is built to prevent friction. It is not defined by banners or speeches or visible passion. It is defined by surfaces, metal, wood, glass, kept clean enough to look permanent. Walls hold charts and schedules that do not explain themselves. Doors close softly. Footsteps are controlled. Even the air feels measured, kept at a temperature that encourages steadiness. The order does not arrive alone. It arrives with the expectation that the structure around it will behave the way it was trained to behave. It is met by routines that have existed longer than any single person in the building. A standard form, a standard tone, a standard reply. The system does not ask for personality. It asks for function. The chain is visible everywhere, even when no one speaks of it directly. It exists in who stands and who remains seated, in who speaks first and who waits, in who is allowed to hold a document and who must receive it secondhand. It exists in the placement of chairs, the angle of desks, the position of a lamp above a map, the way certain conversations stop when a door opens. Messages move downward because that is what they are designed to do. Upward communication exists too, but it is shaped differently. Upward language is cautious. It is filtered. It becomes statistics and summaries and requests for clarification that never challenge the underlying assumption that the order is correct. The system permits information to rise, but it does not permit pressure to rise with it. When the order is read at the first point of reception, it is not treated as a proposal. It is treated as a component, like a part issued to a machine. The receiver confirms the identifiers, compares the timestamps, matches the routing marks, verifies the authenticity through procedures that are practiced so often they no longer feel like decisions. Authentication replaces judgment. The order is then handed to the next layer, not because anyone here has evaluated it, but because evaluation is not their role. Their role is continuity. Their role is movement. What the structure teaches, above all else, is that hesitation is a fault, not moral hesitation, procedural hesitation, the kind that causes delays, the kind that disrupts schedules, the kind that forces additional meetings, additional signatures, additional uncertainty. The system is engineered to interpret smoothness as correctness. If it moves without resistance, it must be valid. If it encounters resistance, the resistance is treated as the anomaly. This is not said openly. It does not need to be. It is enforced in small ways that accumulate over years. A correction that is remembered longer than the work that followed it. A silence that becomes policy because it avoids complication. A reminder delivered with calm professionalism. Follow the protocol. Stay within scope. Use the correct channel. Do not improvise. There are manuals for everything, procedures for requests, procedures for delays, procedures for exceptions. But exceptions require permission, and permission requires upward movement, and upward movement requires language that cannot sound like doubt. So the system rarely produces exceptions. The order continues down through levels that do not see the whole picture. Each layer receives only what is necessary to carry it further. Context is treated as a luxury. The environment does not reward curiosity. It rewards alignment. The chain works because each section believes the section above it has done the thinking, and because each section understands that thinking beyond one section is a kind of overreach. The language of obedience is subtle. It is embedded in the way people speak around responsibility. It is never phrased as refusal, because refusal is not permitted. It is phrased as certainty, understood, confirmed, proceeding, in accordance. The phrases are short, efficient, disciplined. They do not express agreement. They express alignment, and alignment is the true requirement. As the order moves, it becomes less like writing and more like a schedule. It is converted into checklists, into timings, into tasks assigned by section. Pieces are extracted and handed off. Those who receive the smallest fragments may never know that they are participating in the same single instruction. They will only know their part. Their part will make sense on its own. This is how a flawed decision survives intact, by being broken into parts that cannot be questioned individually. The chain itself does not care what the order leads to. The chain cares that the order remains an order. There are places in the structure where a pause could occur, where experience and proximity to reality might allow someone to notice a gap between instruction and condition. But the chain is designed to make those pauses feel inappropriate. The people closest to execution are trained to respect distance from authority, not physical distance, conceptual distance. The idea that those above must know something they do not. The idea that if an order arrives, it has already been weighed, tested, authorized. Their job is not to weigh again. Their job is to carry. The system is efficient. It is disciplined. It is exactly as intended. And because it works so well, it carries the order forward as if the outcome has already been decided. By the time the order reaches the final hands that will turn it into action, it does not feel like a choice. It feels like the next required step in a sequence that cannot be interrupted. The order reaches the point where language ends and movement begins. It does not arrive with ceremony. It arrives embedded in schedules, encoded in timings, reflected in prepared equipment, and synchronized routines. By now, it no longer resembles a decision. It resembles a condition, something that exists independently of approval. Execution begins quietly. Preparations unfold in parallel, not because anyone has coordinated them emotionally, but because coordination has been rehearsed into instinct. Actions occur at prescribed intervals. Materials are positioned where they are meant to be. Signals are exchanged that carry no information beyond confirmation. Everything aligns because everything has been trained to align. There is no conversation about purpose. Purpose has already been translated into procedure. Each component moves when instructed to move. Each unit performs the task assigned to it, neither more nor less. The system does not allow for interpretation at this stage. Interpretation introduces variance. Variance introduces risk. Compliance removes both. Timing becomes the dominant presence. Clocks are checked. Synchronization is confirmed. Delays are noted and corrected. Early movement is discouraged just as firmly as late movement. Precision is valued not because it improves outcomes, but because it demonstrates control. The order demands exactness, and exactness is delivered. The silence that accompanies this process is not tense. It is functional. There is no need to speak when everyone knows what must be done. Communication would slow things down. Signals replace words. Gestures replace discussion. The system has reduced expression to the minimum required to keep motion continuous. Those carrying out the order are not reckless. They are careful. They follow instructions precisely because that is how mistakes are avoided. They have been taught that deviation, even in the name of caution, is more dangerous than obedience. Every action is logged, not in real time, not emotionally, but formally. Checklists are marked, steps are verified, completion is recorded. The system is creating a record even as it moves forward, documenting its own correctness. No one stops to reassess, because reassessment is not part of the sequence. The order does not contain a clause for re-evaluation. It does not specify conditions under which it should be questioned. It assumes continuity. It assumes the environment will conform to the instruction, and the system has been trained to assume the same. Execution continues even when minor discrepancies appear. A timing adjustment here, a minor recalibration there. These are treated as technical issues, not conceptual ones. They are addressed within the scope allowed, corrected without comment, absorbed into the flow. The possibility that the instruction itself might be flawed does not enter the process because there is no mechanism to introduce it. Those closest to the execution are the least empowered to alter it. They see only what is immediately in front of them. They are trained to trust that what they cannot see has already been accounted for. Their training reinforces this trust relentlessly. To doubt would imply a failure of the structure above them, and such implications are considered inappropriate. The order moves forward because everyone involved believes that stopping would cause more damage than continuing. This belief does not come from fear. It comes from experience. In this system, delays are punished. Interruptions are scrutinized. Questions generate reports, and reports generate attention. Attention creates instability. Stability is the highest value. So the order advances. Each segment completes its role and hands responsibility to the next. There is relief in this transfer. Once a task is complete, accountability shifts. The system fragments responsibility so efficiently that no single point bears the weight of the whole. Coordination appears seamless from a distance. Everything happens when it is supposed to happen. Everything moves in the correct direction. The system demonstrates its strength through orderliness. To an outside observer, it would appear controlled, disciplined, precise. Inside the system, it feels the same. No alarms sound, no voices rise. There is no dramatic moment where hesitation might have entered. The execution unfolds exactly as designed. And that is the problem. Because design assumes conditions that are no longer fully present. But assumptions are invisible during execution. They exist only in hindsight, and hindsight is not part of the process. The system cannot see what it was never instructed to look for. The order continues to propagate through actions that cannot be recalled once initiated. Steps pass thresholds that are not marked as thresholds. Movements cross points of no return that are not labeled as such. Still, the procedures hold. Signals continue to be exchanged. Confirmations continue to return. The language remains unchanged. Completed. Proceeding. In accordance. No one reports concern, because concern has no formal definition here. What exists instead is momentum. Momentum created not by urgency, but by alignment. Not by belief, but by structure. The order has become self-sustaining. It no longer requires oversight. It requires only continuation. By the time execution reaches its later phases, the system is fully committed. Resources are engaged. Positions are fixed, options narrow without being acknowledged as options. The order has shaped the environment around it so completely that alternatives no longer appear practical. Stopping now would require disruption. Disruption would require authority. Authority would require justification. And justification is not part of execution. So the order proceeds. Each action confirms the previous one. Each confirmation reinforces the legitimacy of the entire sequence. The system reads its own movement as validation. What is being done feels correct because it is being done correctly. The structure has no sensory organ for doubt. By the time the final confirmations are sent, execution is complete in all but outcome. The system has done exactly what it was designed to do. It has transformed a directive into reality, without resistance, without deviation, without question. And in doing so, it has ensured that whatever flaw existed in the original instruction has now been carried forward intact, protected by discipline, and multiplied by scale. The order has been obeyed. The system remains operational. What comes next is no longer within its control. The first indications of failure do not announce themselves as failure. They appear as minor irregularities, data that does not align perfectly, responses that arrive slightly out of sequence, conditions that differ just enough from expectation to require notation. These discrepancies are observed, recorded, and absorbed into the system without altering its direction. The order remains unchanged. Reports begin to surface from the edges of execution. They are factual, stripped of interpretation. Measurements, status updates, observations phrased carefully to remain within scope. None of them challenge the instruction itself. They cannot. The language available to describe what is happening has been shaped to describe progress, not deviation. The system receives these reports and categorizes them. Some are flagged as delays, some as environmental variance, some as equipment adjustment. Each is routed to the appropriate channel, handled by the appropriate protocol, and resolved in isolation. The structure excels at local correction. It is not designed for systemic interruption. As conditions continue to diverge from expectation, the order persists with the same authority it held at the beginning. There is no trigger point at which the instruction is reconsidered. The system does not contain a mechanism for reassessing validity once execution has begun. The assumption is continuity. The assumption is that the order remains correct until completion proves otherwise. And completion is still ahead. Confusion begins to accumulate, but it has no single location. It exists in overlapping reports that describe similar issues without naming them as such. It exists in timing adjustments that grow more frequent. It exists in the increasing need for clarification that never questions direction, only implementation. The system experiences strain, but strain is interpreted as friction, not warning. Those receiving the most contradictory information are not those with the authority to act on it. The chain ensures that information travels upward, slowly and selectively. By the time it reaches higher levels, it has been filtered, condensed, and reframed to fit existing expectations. What began as deviation arrives as manageable complication. The order remains intact because no single report is sufficient to challenge it. The failure is distributed. Each unit encounters only a fragment of the problem. Each fragment appears solvable within existing procedures. No one sees the full shape of what is forming. And even if they did, the structure would not allow them to name it. The system continues to issue confirmations. They arrive with the same language, the same tone, the same certainty. Progress is reported even as conditions worsen. Movement is tracked even as alignment degrades. The order demands forward motion, and forward motion is delivered. At this stage, hesitation would be noticeable. It would require explanation. It would require justification. It would require someone to acknowledge that what is happening no longer matches what was planned. Such acknowledgments carry risk, not operational risk, but institutional risk. They create records. They invite scrutiny. They imply fault. The system is designed to avoid these outcomes. So the order continues. Attempts are made to compensate within the margins allowed. Resources are reallocated locally. Timelines are compressed or expanded where possible. Instructions are followed with increasing precision, as if precision itself might correct the underlying flaw. This response is rational within the structure. If a process fails, the system assumes it has not been followed closely enough. More discipline is applied, more oversight, more adherence. The possibility that the instruction itself is the source of failure remains unaddressed. As the consequences grow more visible, language becomes more careful. Reports emphasize effort. They emphasize compliance. They emphasize alignment with the order. Phrases like "as directed" and "per instruction" appear more frequently, not as defense but as habit. The system reinforces its own logic even as reality diverges from it. The order has now progressed too far to be altered without disruption. Resources are committed beyond recall. Sequences have advanced past reversible stages. Dependencies have formed that rely on continued execution. To stop now would require acknowledgement that previous steps should not have occurred. The structure resists this implication. Instead, it narrows its focus. The system becomes increasingly concerned with managing the appearance of control. Timelines are maintained on paper even as they slip in practice. Success is defined by adherence rather than outcome. The order is still considered valid because it is still being obeyed. Failure, when it is mentioned at all, is framed as temporary, an issue to be resolved in the next phase, a complication to be addressed after completion. The assumption persists that completion itself will restore order, that the system will stabilize once the instruction has run its course. But the signs no longer align with this belief. Signals that were once routine now arrive late or incomplete. Adjustments that were once minor become constant. Coordination requires increasing effort to maintain. The system is working harder to produce the same confirmations. Still, the order does not change. No one issues a revision. No one recalls the instruction. No one formally acknowledges that the conditions assumed at the outset no longer exist. The chain holds because the chain is not designed to bend. By the time the consequences can no longer be described as manageable variants, the order has already shaped events beyond correction. The failure is no longer approaching. It is unfolding, and the system, committed to obedience, continues to move forward, precisely, efficiently, and without deviation, into the result it was never equipped to prevent. The collapse does not arrive as a single moment. It spreads. What was once a sequence becomes overlap. What was once coordination becomes interference. Timings that had been precise now intersect without alignment. Movements occur as instructed, but the instructions no longer produce coherence. The system continues to operate, but its outputs no longer resemble its intentions. Loss appears first as absence, signals that do not return, units that no longer report within expected intervals, resources that were accounted for but cannot be located within the structure's own records. The system responds by issuing requests for status, then reminders, then confirmations that go unanswered. Each unanswered message is logged. None alter the order. The scale of failure becomes visible not through violence, but through accumulation. Schedules are crossed out and rewritten. Timetables lose relevance but remain posted. Maps are referenced even as conditions no longer match what they depict. The order continues to dictate movement along paths that no longer exist in practical terms. There is no dramatic reversal. The structure does not seize or fracture. It continues to function exactly as designed. That is what makes the collapse so complete. Every part performs its role. Every channel remains active. Every protocol is followed. And yet the result deteriorates. As consequences widen, responsibility becomes increasingly abstract. No individual action can be identified as the cause. Each step was correct. Each confirmation was accurate at the time it was sent. Each procedure was followed without deviation. The failure cannot be traced to a single error because it was not created by error. It was created by continuity. The order remains referenced even as its effects become undeniable. Documents cite it. Reports align with it. Communications return to it as justification. The instruction has become the axis around which explanation revolves. Nothing exists outside its framework. Even collapse is interpreted through compliance. The system records loss without naming it. Numbers change. Totals adjust. Entries are marked incomplete or terminated. Language avoids description. There are no narratives here, only counts and statuses. Reduction replaces explanation. The absence of resistance becomes visible in retrospect. No emergency override is triggered. No broad suspension is declared. The system lacks a vocabulary for systemic halt. It was never trained to stop itself. It was trained to endure. What could have been interruption becomes continuation. What could have been adaptation becomes insistence. The structure tightens its procedures as conditions worsen. Oversight increases. Verification becomes more frequent. Compliance is monitored more closely. The response to failure is more discipline, not less. The assumption persists that control can be restored through rigor, but rigor cannot replace context. The order has already consumed the flexibility required to respond. Resources are exhausted not through misuse, but through perfect allocation to a flawed plan. The system has optimized itself into incapacity. As the collapse expands, the language used to describe it grows smaller. Phrases shorten, descriptions narrow. Reports focus on immediate tasks rather than overall condition. The system retreats into its components because the whole has become unmanageable. What remains is scale. Not spectacle, not chaos, but magnitude. The realization that the consequences are larger than any corrective measure still permitted. That the order has extended beyond the structure's ability to contain its effects. Still, the chain holds. Commands continue to be issued, even when their relevance has faded. Confirmations continue to be returned, even when their meaning has dissolved. The system persists, because persistence is its only function. There is no final stand. There is no decisive acknowledgement. There is only the gradual recognition, never stated, never formalized, that the order has succeeded in one respect only. It has moved through the chain exactly as intended. Everything that follows is consequence. The collapse completes itself quietly, not with an ending, but with saturation. With the system filled to capacity by results it cannot reverse. With records finalized not because resolution was reached, but because there is nothing left to process. The order no longer needs to move. It has arrived everywhere it was allowed to go, and what remains is not disorder, but aftermath, structured, documented, and irreversible. The system stands intact. What it was meant to protect does not. Afterward, the system does not stop. It adjusts. The same channels that carried the order now carry updates, revisions, summaries. They move with the same formality, the same restraint. Language is carefully chosen. Nothing refers directly to collapse. Nothing names the failure as failure. The vocabulary available has already decided what can be said. Records are closed, not abruptly, but methodically. Entries are finalized. Timelines are marked complete. What cannot be accounted for is categorized, not investigated. What cannot be resolved is deferred indefinitely. The system prefers closure to clarity. There are reviews, but they are narrow. They examine compliance, not conception. They verify that procedures were followed, not whether they should have been. Each review confirms what the structure already knows. The order was transmitted correctly, executed as instructed, documented as required. The chain functioned. Responsibility dissolves upward and outward at the same time. No single point holds it. Each level references the one above. Each section points to the directive. The order itself becomes untouchable, not because it is defended, but because it is no longer present. It exists only in archived language, in files stored away from daily use. The system does not erase it. It simply stops mentioning it. New instructions begin to circulate. New schedules are issued. New priorities are established. They resemble the old ones closely enough to feel familiar. The structure recognizes itself and resumes its rhythm. Those who remain within it return to routine. Shifts change. Equipment is reassigned. Spaces are cleaned and repurposed. The absence left by the collapse is managed administratively. Gaps are filled with new assignments. Silence is interpreted as stability returning. There are no ceremonies. There is no reckoning. The system does not need them to continue functioning. It absorbs loss the way it absorbs everything else, by distributing it thinly enough that no single part bears the weight. Occasionally, a reference surfaces. A line in a report, a figure in a table, a footnote that points to a sequence no longer active. These references are not followed. They do not lead anywhere useful. The structure has already moved on. The order has no advocates and no critics. It has been processed. What remains is precedent, not spoken but embedded, the knowledge that the system endured, that the chain held, that continuity was preserved even when outcomes were not. This knowledge is never articulated as a lesson. It does not need to be. It becomes part of the environment. Future orders will move through the same channels, using the same language, relying on the same assumptions. The structure has no memory in the way individuals do. It remembers only what is encoded in procedure, and procedure remains unchanged. Time passes. The collapse recedes into administrative distance. What was once immediate becomes historical, then abstract, then irrelevant. The system does not grieve. It does not reflect. It recalibrates just enough to remain operational. Somewhere within the archives, the order still exists. Filed correctly, time-stamped, verified, complete. It will not be revisited unless required. And it will not be required, because nothing within the structure demands it. The chain remains unbroken. The channels remain open. Another order will come. And when it does, it will move forward with the same certainty, through the same system, toward an outcome that will once again feel inevitable, because inevitability is not created by fate, but by design.